Hello, welcome to the Capital Projects podcast. I'm happy to be here to discuss the main challenges on capital projects and project management. And today I'm really honored to host this podcast with one of the most respected professionals on cost management, risk management, and project planning. I'm talking about Mr. John Hollmann. John is the author of the book called Project Risk Quantification and the lead author of AACE International's Total Cost Management Framework. And he's also the owner of Validation Estimating since 2005. He's an honorary life member of AACE International and the recipient of the Merit and Lifetime Achievement Award. So in this episode, we'll talk about risk planning and risk quantification. I hope you enjoy this conversation on this topic that is so fundamental for project success. John, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you for getting the time to share a bit of your experience with the Capital Projects podcast community.
Yeah, glad to be here and glad to have the opportunity.
Let's start by talking briefly about your career. How did you get involved with capital projects, and then how you fall in love with risk management?
Well, I'm an engineer. I worked in a mining engineer for 10 years. Then in the 1980s, the economy went through a downturn, and I ended up in a nuclear waste project as a mining engineer, but then slowly started doing cost evaluations for the nuclear waste repository. Then that project closed. That's kind of history in my past, is things closing. But I have found a mentor who said I'd be a great cost engineer. So I made a shift from engineering per se into estimating. Then after a long career of estimating and controls and various positions in companies, as I went along, and then I started consulting 17 years ago, I found that the missing link in most estimates was not the base estimate. They were fine. It was the contingency and the quantification of risk was terrible. And I had experience at IPA like you did and understood what the reality looked like. And so I kind of made it my mission to bring that knowledge to the general industry. IPA is a little bit secretive and confidentiality. Doesn't share a lot of that information, so I made it kind of a mission to bring the general learnings to my clients and everybody else. So.
Fantastic. So you started really as a mining engineer working on underground mines? And then to cost
I worked in coal mining, and I was in underground coal, low seam, meaning that it was only about a meter height. I was a ventilation engineer for a while to get all the methane out of the mine. Then later became the corporate mine planning engineer, so I was involved in the overall capital planning there were 5 coal mines for that particular company.
Nice. Nice.
But like I said, then the coal industry collapsed in the 80s and ended up in nuclear waste, which was mining and salt. Again, underground minings of salt for the purposes of the waste disposal. But very interesting field, but quite different than cost engineering.
We're going to focus our conversation on capital projects and risk management. And why do these projects carry so much risk? What is the most difficult for teams to correctly identify those risks? As you said, usually you see that the base estimate has a good quality, but it's hard to predict what it comes, what is not in the spreadsheet. So why is that so risky?
Well, traditionally, the people doing the risk quantification had an estimating mindset, which is very deterministic. And they bring to the table an illusion of control, meaning they feel like if we just list enough risk on a spreadsheet, and put some numbers on it, we got it covered. And what was missing was the understanding that uncertainty does not derive from these risk events that we list and these deterministic kind of viewpoint. Uncertainty, as you know, results from the process of doing a project is uncertainty in every aspect of what it does. The team abilities are uncertain. The level of definition is uncertain. The leadership is uncertain. And so all of the uncertainty that manifests itself is due mainly to the variability of the process and its ability to deliver the project. There's 1,000 different attributes of the project system that play into that. So you have to have a very kind of stochastic viewpoint of measuring those uncertainties and the variability of the system. And then using historical data, we can correlate that to the cost growth and the schedule slip. And that has been proven to be the most reliable method of forecasting the uncertainty. Now, there are risk events like hurricanes and things that you can anticipate. We have to get those on the table. But by and large, those are not the major contributor to the problem. And then the other thing, a lot of ink has been printed about bias. But bias is just another attribute of the project system. Bias all across the board, from the leaders to the managers to the estimators. There's bias everywhere. So I don't view bias as this overarching big thing. It's just another attribute of the system that we need to address directly. We need to rate the bias. We need to validate our estimates against history. And if you do that, it's very manageable and understandable. It's not a big black box, and it's not a matter of strategic lying and so forth, even though that does happen. But by and large, bias is kind of it's just a fact of life, and it's fairly easy to quantify if you address it directly.
So most of it maybe probably comes from the whole system. I mean, you talk about in our book about the systemic risks. Can you please explain to us what they are and why it's so important for the project team and the executives to understand it?
Yeah, systemic risk is actually a term that came out of the financial and economics community. It's an old term about the economic system, is the word it's used there, and I simply borrowed it to address the project system. And the viewpoint you have to take is that is a systems engineering kind of point of view, that conducting a project is nothing more than just another system with people, organizations, systems, tools, the physical assets themselves. All of the parts and pieces make up the functional system. And so if you kind of take that systems engineering, systems view, then the challenge then is to understand the system, how all the parts and pieces integrate, and then understand where uncertainty can enter the system. It can enter in each of the elements. It can enter the interconnections and the communication between the elements. All of those aspects of the system are exposed to variation and uncertainty and error and all of that. So it's important to understand that if you really want a reliable project, capital project system, you have to have a strong system. You have to work on identifying the process, documenting it, training your people, and build up their capabilities and competencies. And all of that, it's very hard work, and that's the problem. It's not under the control of the project manager. So that's another key point, is that the system is owned by the company or the organization. And so by and large, the business management is the owner of most project risk. they have to feel ownership. They have to be responsible. And if the project team is in trouble, the business has to be willing to expend resources and time to build up the team, make sure that it's robust, and to make sure there's training. So that's right off the bat. Project teams are behind the eight ball, as they often don't have support. The team members that they have come out of the organization. They may not have the capability. That's what they have to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And there's sometimes the project manager's hands are tied. Now, within the project, though, there is a project system and culture, and the project manager does have a lot of authority to bring in resources. And so there's several levels. We have to understand what belongs to the business, what belongs to the project manager, and make sure they each do their part to tighten up and improve the system. In the project world, working against that, there's kind of a hero mentality of type A personalities that believe that through their own strength and capability, they can save the day. And, that can work. You can have, 18 people kind of take a weak system and still deliver. And this is a problem, is because 3 times out of 4, the strong team might be able to pull it off. But if you have a weak system, what happens is every third or fourth project is falling off the table. And from an owner perspective with a portfolio, if every fourth project is a failure, your system is a failure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another understanding about the system, is that, you might have really great, strong project managers, some of them, and you can really count on that. And, people can pull off a win. But the idea for a portfolio and capital management is to make sure that 9 out of 10 are successful, not just 3 or 4. And, when you have a mega project, you may only have in your career 3 or 4 mega projects. So they may have been successful, and you get the illusion that you're in control. But, what we know is every 4th or 5th mega project blows up, which destroys the entire portfolio's overall performance. So the whole idea is just to go back to the system and deliver consistently. Maybe not optimally, but if you can deliver 9 out of 10 consistently with reasonable success, that's a whole lot better than 3 great projects and 1 utter failure that just blows up. So that system view is essential to understanding the risk equation. Then I think, but everybody understands the hurricane, and there's really no need to talk about them. We all know what it is, how it will impact us, how we can mitigate it. That's not a problem. But if that's only 20 to 30% of the cause of uncertainty, so we have this huge gap of people not understanding that the risks that matter are not in the risk register, and how do we deal with that, and how do we quantify that? So,
right. In the beginning of your book, you said that for mega projects, on average, at the end they cost around 59% more than expected. And sometimes I already saw this kind of used as an excuse, saying that, okay, we know project management is now all over the world, it's a well-known practice. Everybody understands its importance. So if the projects keep going that way, it means like there's nothing more to be done. It's the way it is. So we need to accept those failures and know that it is what it is. What's your view about it? Because once again, we have more trained people, we have certified professionals, but we still seeing this kind of failure. So it's much more because of the system, or we are also failing in identified project-specific risks?
Mega projects is kind of a unique class of projects. They're really characterized mainly by complexity, which is a system which has many parts and a lot of interconnections. And it gets to the point on a mega project where those are very hard to even identify and individually manage. And you may also have multiple project managers working under a program director, just another whole layer of potential for failure and so forth. So the reason, my hypothesis for mega project blowouts is when you have a weak system in general combined with complexity. It's a nasty actor. If you have a strong system and a lot of complexity, it'll tend to keep the project within the normal uncertainty umbrella. So you might have a 5 or 10% cost growth, but that's not going to destroy the economics. Where you get the blowouts is when a weak system and the complexity are together. And essentially what happens is you lose control. Not entirely, but for all practical purposes, your project management actions are not getting the result that you expect, and they compound and build upon each other, and so it's a nasty actor. So why we have the skills individually, possibly, putting together into a team and a system is a whole other matter. And then in mega projects, we have the whole issue of contract strategy and delivery strategy. That's a hot topic nowadays. Yeah. Things like early contractor involvement, all of those play into it. So you have different companies and players and in the project that may have different purposes and different, so that's very hard to coordinate as well. So a lot of the effort nowadays is on the delivery strategy and trying to see how we can improve that part of the system. But again, it's still only part of the system. I don't care what contractor or what contract strategy you have, you're still going to have the fundamental issue of the weak system overall. And then we also have the thing that IPA and Ed Murrow has brought up a lot is speed kills. When you have a complex project, that if you try to push the envelope, you're already weak. You're already on the edge of chaos. Mm-hmm. And when you try to accelerate the work, you're just going to push it off the edge. It's going to be beyond the capability of the system to deliver, and then you're tempting a blowout. So it's better to be consistent and reliable and to just do your homework and do everything correctly than to try to push the envelope. Generally doesn't work. So all of those things combined end up with probably about 1 in 7 mega projects blows out. And like I said, they end up in the newspaper, and that even though it's only 1 in 5, 1 in 7, it will destroy the economics of your capital investment program. So they're obviously a bone of contention. But again, I don't believe in the strategic misrepresentation theory. I just believe it's our lack of understanding of what drives uncertainty. By the way, my paper this year at AACE is on a new risk quantification method for complex projects. And, one of the problems is in our early estimates, we fail to recognize that there are still multiple scope options. We haven't decided on them yet. And our risk quantification, what we do is we tend to pick one option and we quantify that. So what I'm telling people is that if you quantify the risk of potential multiple options or scenarios and very easily quantify that matches the historical data. So when we have these 57% overruns, it's really just a matter of what we failed to quantify was the multiple possible options within the business scope. For example, the transportation project might have 8 subway stations in the initial budget, and then they decide later to build a 9th. It's not a change in scope of the overall project. It's just that when they came up with the original number, they assumed 8 stations, and it really was 9. That 9th one was always there. It's just that the base estimate didn't have it. So those are the types of things we need to quantify in the equation as well. We tend to fail to recognize the multiple options, but also scenarios. A scenario analysis can help. So anyway, that's where I'm headed now. My papers and recommended practice will be about that type of issue.
Fantastic. One thing that I see a lot, as you're saying, in the early stages of the project, the executives try to advance as fast as possible. So you go to the FEL2, for example, without a clear direction, and then you end up finishing that phase without freezing or without a frozen scope. So you get to the FEL3 with an estimate that is too aggressive because we are maybe putting more effort, or we are better at estimating what we know, but there's a lot of uncertainty that we are carrying out for not finishing the previous stage as expected. And once we get to the end of FEL3, the cost is much higher, and then the company tries to cut scope while we're starting to move to construction because they have a tight schedule and so on, and then start to build up all those uncertainties and end up with a big failure. So it's really hard to deal with this imposed schedule pressure, and maybe the idea that you cannot miss the window of opportunity, but you only can have a good project if you define well, and then you jump right to execution in order to save time, which is the worst.
Yeah, and I think an IPA, I believe, is headed down this road. Is the most important gate is the FEL2 gate, or class 4, called, some people call it the select phase. Now, in I think IPA, on a lot of projects, we call that de facto sanction, because projects are rarely canceled after that phase. And if people don't take that FEL2 seriously and really look at the options and pick the right solution, a lot of them jump right into one selection without really looking at it, and then they regret it later.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, a lot of my emphasis is to improve a project system is to make sure that FEL2 gate is taken very seriously, because once you're committed, you're committed. Even though you haven't funded it fully, you're essentially very rarely back out. So the FEL2 is essential. And like you said, if it wasn't done well, then all of the surprises pop up at FEL3. Too late to do anything about them, really. And you're just behind the 8 ball from there on, So, yeah, if you don't do your FEL2 correctly, you're in trouble. Now, the other thing about FEL2, that in the public domain, in the, let's say, transportation projects, that is when the first number is usually published and taken to the legislature, and it's in the press. And the transportation sector is probably the worst at doing good scope definition at FEL2. And they didn't actually, the transportation world didn't even have a phase gate systems until about 10 or 15 years ago. So they're very late to the game. So I think a lot of this noise about transportation and other projects overrunning, they're really not overrunning. What it is we simply have really lousy FEL2 estimates with very lousy risk quantification, greatly underestimating. The project was always what it was. It's just that at that phase, we didn't understand the scope, and we didn't address the lack of scope definition in the risk funding. So if we just tighten up that ship back there at FEL2, I think it would solve so many problems, both in general and as our profession. I think me and my peers have a lot of blame to carry for not conveying that message and not applying appropriate risk quantification at that early phase. That deterministic mindset is kind of corrupting our practice. We are not estimators. We are risk analyst, which is a different thing.
It's kind of illusion that we know how to quantify uncertainty, as you said in the beginning.
All right, yeah, put them on a spreadsheet, throw some ranges on them, and there you go. It's like, no, we know that does not work, and it's not an AACE recommended practice because of that. But people keep doing it.
Yeah.
We can't seem to stop it.
You use the example of the hurricane. One thing that I hear a lot is that people are in doubt how to consider into the project those low probability risks which might have a huge impact, because if you put it together with the estimate and in the contingency calculation, consider the expected value as we do for most risks, it will pollute the data, because it probably will be 0 or 1. If it doesn't happen, that's fine. If it happens, it might be catastrophic. How the team should address this kind of threat?
Well, the standard process, and this is just should be a regular thing, is the low probability, high impact cannot be funded with contingency. Contingency is a administrative concept, by the way. It's a number you pick, and it's a budget like any other. Really is only useful for risks that have nominal impacts, usually a continuous nature. Productivity is a little good or bad. The weather is good or bad. Fairly nominal individually. So when you have a low probability, high impact risk, contingency is simply not capable of funding it. So you have to have management reserves, specific reserves established for each of those identified risks. So if it's a hurricane or whatever it is, that you quantify the impact of it, and then each one of them is a decision in its own right. If this risk occurs, the response, the action that the team takes to fix it, will be a business change.
Yeah.
So that's not even for us to decide. So what we have to do as analysts is identify those that big hitters, lay them out for the business, and say one by one, if this risk occurs, here's what would happen. And you have to decide, do you want to fund it or not? There's really nothing in between. You fund it or you don't. And we're going to document why we decided that. Now, there are other ways of establishing reserve. You can have one reserve for multiple high impact events, because they're not all going to occur. If it's 5% for each risk, well, the chance that one of them happens might be 25%, and so you could have one reserve for multiple risk events. So anyway, it's a very simple approach. It's just that a lot of companies don't allow management reserve as a policy.
Yeah.
Which puts them behind the 8 ball. So what are you going to do? Well, you're probably just going to ignore it. And if you ignore it, well, then you're going to have the blowouts that we keep saying. You can't ignore it. You have to have reserve. It's simply a fundamental concept of management that cannot be, you can't say no to it. Contingency just does not work for that. So we need to establish the reserves for those items. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is if you do a risk analysis and you have 7 or 8 of those, it's probably a project you don't want to do.
Yeah.
Because individually, any one of those risks will threaten the success of the project. So if you have 7 or 8 of these, the probability of one of them occurring is pretty much a certainty. So what that says is you need to go back to the drawing board, change your strategy, change the scope, whatever you got to do to mitigate those big risks and try to get it down to a reasonable level.
Yeah.
Then the third thing to consider is portfolio level. If the project is not mega and you have multiple projects that can balance out with lows and highs, another possibility for those low probability, high impact is to fund a portfolio level or program level fund, so that if one of the 5 projects gets hammered, you have already considered it and it's covered at that higher level, whether portfolio or capital budget or program or somewhere at a higher authority. So there's multiple avenues to finance those. Rather, if you have 6 reserves on 6 projects, that might be too much money. You're over allocating. So all of that needs to be considered at a portfolio level.
Nice. In one of my experiences, I worked for a company where contingency was forbidden. So once we once we had the base estimate, we were under a lot of pressure to reduce the number, even though we were already starting execution. And for each execution contract that we signed, which was lower than the estimate, we lost that money. So the executives would come and say, okay, you saved now 3%, so it's 3% less on your budget. We couldn't reallocate from one account to the other. So it was very hard scenario for us.
Yeah, and I'm an estimator by my original training and experience. And, estimators aren't stupid. And if they're going to get punished for overruns and the management does not allow contingency, I'm gonna make that problem go away. Yeah. All my estimates are going to have 10% built into them, and you will not know because I know more about the estimate than you do, and I can find 100 different ways to pad and other. So, and that happens. That is actually the predominant behavior in what we call predictable cultures, where management doesn't like contingency. They think it's fluff or waste. They cut it, and the team just magically finds ways to be predictable by hiding the money.
Yeah.
And the price of that is about 10 to 20% extra capital.
Wow.
And then you come out on budget and everybody has a party. But what they forget is that we just wasted 10% capital invisibly without any recognition. So I just want everybody to know estimators are very good at making sure they don't get punished in the future.
Yeah.
One way or the other.
That's right. Well, with all this that we said and the problems with the systemic risks and project-specific risks, how do you think that companies can improve in risk management? How can teams be better at estimating and executives understanding the risk of the projects? How it can be improved?
Well, it starts with understanding, and right off the bat, we have culture issues, like you mentioned, without allowing contingency. You're pretty much doomed as a system if you have that mentality. So you got to have the right understanding and mentality. Then risk management per se, from a qualitative perspective, is not really a big problem, I don't think, on projects. Everybody has risk registers. Everybody pretty good, and engineers and constructors are pretty good at identifying those risk events, deterministic thing. And people are tracking that. They're doing a pretty decent job, and there's good software for that, multiple packages out there for tracking that. The problem is the lack of understanding of what's driving the risk and the failure to manage those aspects, as we discussed, the systemic risk. Then, once you understand that the systemic risks are driving the cart, we need to budget, quantify that risk appropriately. That's probably the biggest single missing element. Is I can almost count on my hands how many companies are doing that, and that's been my challenge, is trying to change that, and IPA's challenge, and getting people to recognize that risk, to fund it, quantify it appropriately. Once you do that, I think once you have it quantified appropriately, the risk management process, the change management process, will do its job reasonably effectively. So I think it's really the matter of just, we're really back in the dark ages still of understanding risk, and there's a lot of old thinking and misconceptions and legacy that go back before either of us started that simply cannot seem to kill them off. And I'm not sure how to do that. But we need to bring empiricism, and that's the next thing is, and that's the future state is collecting history and using that in planning. And ultimately, it'll be artificial intelligence, but that's still 10, 15 years away, really. But bringing that empirical viewpoint will open people's eyes to the reality, and we can get away from this fooling ourselves, as we're doing now. We're basically just all running around fooling ourselves. People call that bias. It's really just a lack of understanding.
Yeah. And you talked about collecting history. Are you seeing companies more prone to do that at the end of the projects and come back with the data and explore a little bit more the causes of the failures and the problems? Because I'm not seeing that much. And I also, another part that I think it's really important, and it's missing in many companies, that, okay, you know that your budget was, your final cost was much more than your budget, and your schedule had a high delay. So, but what about operability? You just delivered a plan that is not operating well, and this will hurt the business much more. But when you talk about cost and schedule, the executives are well known of that, because they had to put more money, they had to allow for more time, and kind of forget the consequences of bad definition in the life cycle of the asset. Are you seeing companies more prone to get this data back to the system and improving, or it's kind of, okay, leave it that, like, don't talk about it and let's focus on the next project?
I think people are starting to recognize it. Part of the hype around AI, the good news about that hype is that managers and vice presidents want to jump on that bandwagon now.
Yeah.
Now they don't quite know what they're asking for or what they're going to get, and they're just. But all of a sudden, there's some excitement there that was not there. But the reality is, AI is not going to really help most of us for many years. I do see more companies trying to build a database into their system and their planning, but it's still very small. The good news is 10 years ago, there was really no commercial software that could do what we need to do for project historical databases. And right now, there are at least 3 commercial viable systems. That was a roadblock 10 years ago that's not there now. You can go on the street and get a tool that does things like normalization. That's kind of a painful thing to do, but now the tools have that capability built in. So we have that. So I am working with several clients right now on databases, but it's still a very small number of projects. Now, another problem we have is everybody's gotten so lean in their staffing, and cost discipline is kind of the magic term. And what's happened is the staffs have become so minimal that database development, when people look into it, takes time and resources. Yeah. There is no easy way, because you have to have strong structure, and you have to have discipline in your controls and your closeout. And all of those things take time and people and skills. And what I found at most of my clients is they are so lean that they are working with contracted staff. They have turnover. Nobody stays in a job more than 2 years. There's no continuity. All of those work against having a database and using it and building on it. The number of companies that have what I call stick-to-itiveness is very low. The other thing I joke about a little bit is I call the half-life of vice president. Vice presidents come in and they have all these new ideas and they start a database effort. The half-life of an executive is about 3 years, meaning in 3 years, you're going to be a new vice president with entirely new ideas. And I have been through that my entire career, company by company. You put all this effort in a 2 or 3 year endeavor, and then the third year, poof, we'll go this way, we'll go that way. So, and then companies merge, and then they split up, just so the financial game playing and the corporate shenanigans just constantly defeat any long-term improvement. So, but occasionally they do pull it off. So yeah, that's been a problem. Is just continuity in these improvement efforts. And database takes a minimum of 3 years to get to the first success.
Yeah, that 3 years for some of the companies I know is an eternity for executives. So sometimes it's half that.
Yep.
Which was your best experience working with a company or with a project and seeing they improve their practices? What was the most special thing about it?
Yeah, and I probably shouldn't name names or whatever, but when I started consulting, one of my first clients was Enbridge Pipeline, which is the North American's, I think, biggest transportation oil and gas company, and they wanted to improve their system. They came in with a system viewpoint. They had learned the lessons from IPA and others, and they started tackling all the weak points in their system, whether it was estimating, controls, structure, databases, risk quantification. And the other part is that they had continuity. Because it was a quasi-regulated industry, they had a little more stability than maybe some private companies might have. Plus, the oil and gas business was growing at the time. So they kept at it, project by project, and implementing those improvements. So it was, hugely rewarding to see them implement all these tools, and it paid off. So they actually, Enbridge published a paper in 2016, I believe, showing the improvements over time. It's really the only longitudinal study I've seen of the value of cost engineering. If you apply all of the good recommended practices that we say, does it work? Well, the answer from their paper was yes. So I really wanted them to write that paper because there really was nothing documented of a continual improvement process. And I don't know where they're at now. I haven't really done much with them in the last 5 years or so, but that was hugely rewarding. I felt like I could retire in peace. Look, it does work. Just apply the practices that are written, put resources on them, stick to it, and it will pay off. And that was, just really rewarding for me.
That's great. That's great. It shows that hard work and discipline pays off. That's nice.
Yeah. So I think things went downhill in the oil business. So heaven forbid, I don't know where they're at, but hopefully it's still good.
I had one experience, one client that I knew. I had a friend working there, and they started a very small PMO, and they kept growing for years and years and years because the company was seeing the value of it. It was really changing the practices and was much better in planning. And then once they lost a big contract, what they done in the next week was firing the entire team, the entire PMO team. And then 2 months after that, they got a big contract once again, and they were hiring new people to start it over. So it was a rupture. It just finished all the work that was done, and once you change people, you have the processes, you have the procedures, but it makes a lot of difference when you can't keep the same people working.
Yeah, it's a fact of life. It's just hard to. You just hope you'll be able to ride the wave long enough. Most people's careers, they're going to have one or two of those kind of successes. But I always tell people, young people, just if you find yourself in a bad situation, go find a better one. Because they're probably not going to get better on their own. Just waiting for it to happen. But that's another problem with mega projects is a mega project itself is almost like a small company.
Yes.
They last for 5 to 7 years, and people make a career out of them almost. And so that's a case where if you get started on the right foot, you can watch a strong system succeed.
Mm-hmm.
But then after 7 years, you're done, and then poof, you're on the next project, so it can be frustrating to be on a successful mega project, and then you move over to the next one, and it's like the Keystone Cops, But the fun of a project career is you will see you'll get to go through this 3 or 4 or 5 times. Over time.
And getting on this topic, which advice you can give to those professionals who are willing to develop themselves in risk management, in project planning, or those who are already managing projects but want to be able to manage much larger projects and increase their success rate?
Well, I mean, everybody needs to take responsibility for their own career. Like I said, we have all these. You're going to change jobs, 8 times, and you're going to be on many, many projects and multiple companies. Nobody's going to take responsibility for your training, So that's why I've been very active in AACE International. So I always recommend people be active. I mean, not just join, but participate in the developments and the developing practices and presenting papers. And that's where you're going to get, for your own personal career, the bang for the buck. Now, if your company gives you training, great, but you can't really count on that. So I just tell people, just take responsibility for your career. I personally have, been maybe too willing to leave companies when I find that the opportunities aren't there, or their culture is not conducive to personal development. Don't wait it out. Move, and that can be very hard. I mean, everybody's got families and things, but just hoping your company's going to carry you along. Occasionally you can be some of the megas are very good career companies, but I think it's getting very rare now to find one company you can have a 35-year career.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, just expect to change and move, and just keep your eye on the ball of improvement. Improve constantly. Another example is like at AACE. I write a paper every year, at least one, and I do it very consciously. I write papers on topics I don't understand. And people think that's kind of backwards. It's like, well, I have to get 10 years experience before I write a paper. It's like, no, find something that's interesting that you don't quite grasp, or you want more understanding. Once you commit to the paper, then you have to study it and read and start synthesizing the ideas in your head. So that's been, the last 25 years. Every time I write a paper, it's on something I want to be better at. Usually when I'm done with a paper, I find that I am now one of the world's experts in it, because so few people take the time to do that type of reading. So by doing the papers and doing the reading, you will make yourself, if not, the expert, you will know as much as just about anybody by having done that paper. So I recommend young people to use papers and presentations as a mechanism for forcing yourself and incentivizing yourself to improve. Write on things you don't know now, but by the time you're done with the paper, you will,
That's a great strategy. I like that. John, we could go on for hours and hours. From my side, it's a great learning experience, but we are on top of our time. I would just like to thank you again for getting the time to share a bit of your experience here with the Capital Projects podcast community. It's a really nice conversation. I'm sure our community will like it. And so once again, thank you for taking time in your busy agenda to talk with us.
Thank you for the opportunity. And I know it takes a lot of work and time on your part to put these together. So it's a credit to you. So I really appreciate what you're doing here. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. As I said, I really admire John's work on risk management and cost engineering, and have this opportunity to talk with him here was a big honor. So I hope I see you back here in our channel in the future. We have more content in English coming soon, so stay tuned, follow our channel, and I hope you have success in your projects. See you.